Our final session, Restarting Israel's Economy, tackles the critical question of economic recovery and resilience in the post-war era. Chaired by Yossie Hollander, we welcome Avi Simhon, Dror Strum, and David Woo to share their strategies and insights. Please join me in welcoming them to JNS.
Good afternoon. You're here in a unique capacity of being the few people interested in the economy, which may be driving everything. So I'm going to introduce the same question, at least in the beginning, but we have a very distinguished panel here. Avi Simhon, who is the head of the Israel Economic Council. Did I correctly? No, Government Economic Council, sorry. No, what did I say correctly?
It's a
National Economic Council. I knew I was saying it bad. Dror Strum is the CEO of the Israel Institute for Economic Planning, and David Woo is a macroeconomist and was in 2013. They said that he was one of the 10 smartest people in Wall Street. So in 2014 and 15 the market didn't crash, then it's probably okay. So the question first is, could you give your opinion, what is the situation today of the Israeli economy? You know, we're in after the war, but we're in the war, it's both, but could you give a quick overview of where is the Israeli economy today? We'll start with Avi, and then Dror, and I believe David will give a little bit more of the international perspective. Please.
Do you think they hear me? Yeah. For an economy that is now going through a year and a half of war, it's great. Now, if we look in absolute terms, it's okay. It's okay. But really, the resilience that the Israeli economy showed during this war is really amazing. We suffered, of course, first of all, we suffered the heavy loss of life. There are many people who serve for many months in the army, in reserves. Actually, you know, the most productive people at the age of 25 to 40, 45, there are many of them that now serve in reserves. We had to spend, it's estimated that the war cost us directly and indirectly 250 billion shekels, which is something like 12%, 13% of GDP. Given all that, we are doing okay. I mean, this year we'll probably grow at a faster rate than most OECD countries. So, in a short, summarizing it, it's not as well as we used to grow, but it goes pretty well.
Dror, what's your view?
Well, I think it's an excellent point of time to ask that question, because we are at the end of 2024 and we have enough perspective to examine that. But when we did in our institution a comprehensive study with all the relevant parameters, namely debt to GDP, growth, unemployment, and taxes revenue, of course, and all other parameters, we found out that we are in excellent shape. In fact, it's really, you could just wonder how could this be? But when you look even further, 20 years back, you see that Israel has a good tradition of getting well from security events. If you take all the security events from the last 2 decades, you can see that after those events, the growth in GDP was even accelerated because of that. Now we have cumbersome and we have problems, and maybe we should address this later on, but the general trend is really marvelous.
David, please.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, we can sit here and talk about how resilient the Israeli economy has been over the last 18 months, but you know what? I can tell you something about resilience, in the Russian economy. Because the Russian economy actually grew 3% last year, and it's basically in the third year of war. War economies usually do pretty well. And then the Israeli government ran a massive budget deficit, 7% of GDP, because war is expensive. But much like Russia, which also was saving for rainy days. In other words, Russia had very strong fiscal position heading into the war in 2022. So did Israel, thanks to Bibi. So I think from that point of view, all you can say is that, so Israel started with a strong fiscal position heading to the war. And with the war, we saw massive expansion of basically fiscal policy, especially in defense. And that has basically bolstered the Israeli economy. I don't think you can really say much more than that. Okay. I think that is about the best thing you can say about Israel, whether it's good or bad. I mean, I think obviously, Israel grew faster than Germany last year, but so did Russia. So from that point of view, I think, if there's any takeaway from the Russian economy over the last 3 years, because this war is now in the third year, is that it's been very, very bullish for the Russian manufacturing industry. And so from that point of view, the need to actually produce arms locally, which I imagine is going to now take hold here in Israel in terms of manufacturing munition, I think that is going to give probably a more sustained kick to the Israeli economy going forward. Although how Israel is going to balance its trade with the US with the threat of tariff from Trump while trying to basically revive its manufacturing industry here in Israel, that's a different story altogether, which we can talk about.
So basically,
Yossi,
whatever.
Can I say something?
Yeah,
about
please.
that? But notice that the growth that we are experiencing now is not coming from the munition industry.
No.
The munition industry indeed grew very nicely, but much of the growth that we are now experiencing is from the traditional high-tech sector. Traditional only in Israel, it's a traditional sector. So I don't think it's the same case of Russia.
I think the tech export, if I remember correctly, I think was down last year, Israel. If you look at the overall tech export in Israel, was down last year. So I think from that point of view, that's, it's not quite strictly true. If you look at GDP per capita, actually fell last year in Israel, and now 2 years in a row.
Not exports of the high tech.
Yeah.
There was a decline in exports, but decline in export was, most of it was from coming from the fact that there is no tourism. So export services and some other stuff, not high tech. The high tech sector is now at its peak.
I think it's interesting. I think another interesting point is that, again, we have like big movements, okay? So tourism almost went to zero. Defense industry, not just, export defense industry is like, triple what it was 4 or 5 years ago. So there's like these movements that happen not just because of us, etc., but affect our economy as well. The war affects it as well, of course, but there's a lot of external war-related issues that affect it in both ways. But please.
Yes, just a couple of points regarding the comparison to Russia. When I looked at the CDS, at the risk premium of Russia, and compared it to Israel, it's like multiplied by 20 or something like that. And another point is that in the tradition of Israel history, we used to come out pretty well from short wars. Every security event in the past lapsed very little time. This is the first time that we are in a...
In the last 50 years.
Yes, I'm not
50
older.
years ago.
I'm not older like you,
right.
so that's as much as I can remember. But at the last 20 years, we didn't have a period that 1 year and 7 months, I think it is, that lasted so long, and we had to put up with it. So it's a pretty cumbersome when you have like dozens of percent from your labor force at a reserve in the army. When you have evacuations of both the south and the north, and you have to materialize these people, you have to pay them money in order to survive. So this is pretty cumbersome burden, and we managed to do that. That's, from my perspective, pretty wondrous.
May I say something? Or it's
That's what makes it fun.
Listen, I'm not trying to put down the Israeli economy, but I think we need to also be a bit realistic. Last year, the biggest driver of GDP growth was government spending, right? Defense. So there's no doubt that was the key driver of economic growth. So to think otherwise, right? Just like in Russia, Russia also has extremely low unemployment rate because all these basically people being called up in the army to go serve in the front and so on and so forth. So I'm not saying, by the way, I think, the comparison with Russia is a good one. I mean, by the way, you might, I don't know where your sympathies lie in this war, but actually, I think I happen to support Russia in this war against Ukraine. But most importantly, as I said before, I think the difference for me, if I look at the recession in Israel that essentially kicked in after the Passover massacre, because I was in Israel in 2001 when I saw that happen. And the Israeli economy, basically it was not even a war. I mean, it was just basically, we also saw tourism basically drying up and everything. That was when Bibi took over and all that. At the time I remember, it was not even a war. People were calling an Argentine-style default, if you remember, right, in Israel. This time, obviously, Israel is in a much stronger position. The shekel was stronger because Israel is running a balanced current account, because the fiscal position is much stronger to begin with. So I think from that point of view, I think there's a lot going on. But again, is the Israeli economy so dynamic? The last basically year that I think that while it left me basically speechless and breathless, I think there's a lot of room for improvement. There's no doubt about that.
David, I want to. We're all now focusing on David, but I want to say something. You are right. I was quoting at the beginning. I was quoting some artificial numbers, GDP growth, etc. That to GDP. But I think we should go to the fundamentals. The fundamentals, and we've been talking about it before. The fundamentals of the Israeli economy. So let me give you a couple of numbers, okay? Do you know the number of engineers, of people working in R&D, in research and development, per worker? These are OECD numbers. The average for the OECD, and recall the OECD are the advanced economies, the average there is 12. 12 people work in the R&D sector per 1,000 workers, okay? Number 2 in the world is 21. Israel is 39. 39. So this is the basic feature of the Israeli economy. The Israeli economy does not resemble any other economy. Number of people working in R&D in Israel is 3 times the average of advanced economies. So yes, we could talk about research, and we could talk about debt to GDP, we could talk about growth rate and what is growing, but the fundamental feature of the Israeli economy is, or the fundamental strength of the Israeli economy is the amazing amount of ingenuity that we have here.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, this is why, I think tech is now about 8% of GDP, 10% of the workforce in Israel,
12,
which is the highest.
It's between 10 and 12.
I mean, it's the highest. It's the highest in the world. So I think, and to the extent,
Please, guys, please, no interruption from the audience, please.
But I think, and this is why before the war, the economy was growing 6%. I mean, that was the most impressive thing. In 2022, the Israeli economy grew 6%. I mean, that's amazing, given a country with per capita income of Israel still be able to grow 6%. That is extraordinary. Okay, so from that point of view, the last 2 years haven't been amazing. Let's put it that way. I think the question, I'm less interested in the 10% because I think that 10%, let's just take that as a given, thanks to the Russians and so on and so forth. The question now is what happens to the other 90%, okay? And then if you look at the people who want to come to Israel, make aliyah from Europe, from the US, they're going to be the new economic forces, okay, in Israel. I mean, I don't tell you immigration is picking up, so on and so forth. I think there are some fundamental issues of the Israeli economy that we should not basically skirt around that actually makes the life of the other 90% not that attractive, because we all know that Israel is ranked the 4th most expensive country in the world, according to OECD. And that maybe tech people like you don't care because you make a lot of money, but for most Israelis, that matters. That is actually, and that is a huge issue.
Okay, so that's a good time to go to Dror, because that's like his life mission. So, or one of them. So we're discussing now what are the challenges that and Israel has challenges. By the way, I spoke in another session about 2 days ago. I said, no matter what, Israel is a democracy with a lot of problems. I'll take our problem any day and versus, let's say, France or Germany, etc. I want our problems, okay? But please, Dror, talk a little bit about what are the challenges that we're facing.
So David taught us that don't get high from your own supply. Okay. we already internalized that. Still, I think that the performance of the economic is really outstanding. But of course, that doesn't mean we don't have problems. Usually, I'm a reformist, so I'm used to talk about the problems. This was an encouraging experience for me to come here, speak about the general performance of the economy. But the major point is really the cost of living, which is very high, especially in fundamental goods like FMCG, which means food, toiletics in the supermarket chains. Those are very high. I think that each one that was visiting in Israeli supermarkets could see for themselves that prices are extremely high. So what happens is that Israel has a long past of reforms in other areas. We did structural reforms in banking industry, which I believe you are well aware regarding your past, and in energy. And we didn't have one major reform in the food industry. And we have a problem about that because you have to remember that back 70 years ago and even 60 years ago, Israel was founded on a socialist economic principles. So we encouraged back then monopolies to get wider, to get fatter, and this is what happened. So when you look on the structure of the Israeli food industry, you find out that we have like 4 or 5 or mega monopolies which control nearly half of the goods that people buy in the supermarkets. So we don't have any other alternative, and I think that I realize we may come even sooner to that point when we have to divest these monopolies along with other structural reforms, because it's really struggling the population. That's the situation, and it gets even worse every year. So we have like 4 firms which control the domestic production. We have 2 major importers which control most of the import to Israel. Because once we had the hope that coming from the import would reduce prices in Israel, no, they collaborated. The importers collaborated with the domestic monopolies, and they equalized an anti-competitive equation. So that is the general frame. We already designed some of these steps, but we need to remove barriers, of course, to further importers to come in, and of course reduce regulation, because regulation and bureaucracy are the third pillar which strangles enterprise and competition.
Can I just respond to something? I think you obviously, you I think are responsible for the most important policy, choice that Israel is facing right now. I mean, you are running antitrust, and it's your job to sort of break up on the monopolies. You are running and so on and so forth. But what I'm trying to get at is like, well, I agree. A couple of weeks ago, my wife and I were at a dinner party where we met a gentleman who actually, he's a shipbuilder. He owns a basically shipyard in Haifa. But a few years ago, he started to grow blueberries in the north.
Yeah,
exactly. Carmel, blueberries. It's an extraordinary story, by the way.
Yeah.
And then the reason why this guy is now making millions, growing strawberries and blueberries, is because he's cut out the middleman altogether. He's basically built a distribution system. And of course, the question now I have is that we've been talking about, I still remember the Rothschild Boulevard protests. People have been talking about the cost of living in Israel for so long. Bibi has sworn to break up monopolies. What's happened in the last 10 years? What has Israel done in terms of breaking up monopolies? Because this is sort of a bit of an old story by now.
Okay.
So where has Israel been successful? Where has not been so successful in this?
Great. I would love to answer that, but Avi, would you like
please,
to know?
this is yours.
He has been in the government for the recent...
So he's been there for the last 20, so
But I'd love to answer after Avi as well.
No, we were not successful. First of all, we were not successful, and we are products here are far too expensive. You're right. By the way, if you want still a good number, we are now less expensive than the United States. Would you believe it? So we have one very, very small achievement in the last report of the OECD. In the last report of the OECD, we are ranked a little bit less expensive than the United States, but to add to the list of things that are too expensive here, residential. Okay, housing here is far too expensive. I'm the government. Yeah, I'm working in the government. I'm working in the government, and I could tell you that we are making huge efforts, but we are not very successful. It's like trying to drain the ocean with a bucket. That's how I feel every day I'm coming to the office.
Okay, maybe I'll explain why, because we were too gentle along these years. The government chose, I was not already there, though I can't take responsibility for that, but they chose to defrost some of the barriers from the regulation barriers to the import, hoping that competitive goods from the import will reduce prices, as I explained before that. But in a very concentrated area, like an oligopoly, you can't have those people competing. They would rather collaborate, and that's what happened. So we are now approaching the point that we don't have any more good choices or gentle choices other than to split monopolies, to do it in an adequate form, in an adequate procedure, in a polite manner, respecting the rights of property and so on. But we have to do that as good as the US did back like 100 and more years ago in Standard Oil, in American tobacco and so on. We don't have any
if I may.
Before you give the answer, I'm sure you're going
I don't have
to
the answer.
No, I'm sure that you'll give some very good answers. But I'll tell you one thing which we inflict on ourselves, and these are taxes. We impose one of the highest tax rates on consumption goods. Now, why do we do this? First, I don't think we should, but we are doing it, and we are doing it, and the explanation is that we have to finance our war. We spend on security more than any other advanced economy in the world. Not just more than any other, almost twice than the next one. Okay, so this is a real cost, and that's part of it. Everything that Dror said is correct, but part of the reason, one reason why we are so expensive is because we have to finance more security than any other country in the world.
I have a question about that because I've got five grandchildren, by the way, here in Israel. I've got two stepdaughters here in Israel, and then one of my stepdaughters recently came back, to party. Said, "Oh, well, I just met this really rich guy. Comes from a very rich family. His father imports Toyota." Okay. Now, apparently in Israel, if you're an importer of Toyota or Honda, whatever, you can become very, very rich. Honestly, I don't know very many countries that is the case. It's not like in the US, you're going to find the import of Toyota to be very rich. In Israel, apparently, yes, you have very few importers, and then these guys dominate monopolies, and there is a lot of high rent. So we're not talking about expensive because people are not productive, but because the rent of basically owning a business is very high, because there's not enough competition. But what I want to know is that if BB is not going out there and trying to break up these monopolies, is it because the political forces, that these monopolies are too powerful politically, that somehow it makes it impossible for the government to break them up? I mean,
May I answer that?
Is true?
I can actually answer that. That's the main point. I'm sorry, you're at fault. Now, why is it the Israeli public is at fault? Because not a single Israeli will vote on the issue of cost of living. security will always come first. So we'll be, and none of them, nobody, there's no party that its main platform is, okay, we're going to lower the cost of living and they get elected. Okay, nobody's doing it. Nobody's doing this for a very simple reason, because the surveys show that that is not the issue that people will vote on. Okay, so until people vote on this, we will not see any result.
That we had a reform which is called the Bahar reform, like 15 years ago, maybe more. I was attending this committee, and Bibi was the Minister of Finance. He led this reform in which we divested from the major banks in Israel all the funds that they managed fraudulently in order to erase potential competition with the banks. That happened eventually. But I think that Bibi learned from this lesson, because like Yossi said, nobody credited him electorally for this reform. He was nearly bygone from the political arena because everybody was hostile because of this reform. So reforms, as I see it, needs very brave and bold leadership, explaining these things to the common people and to the member of the parliament in order to go through. So it has a political background, commenting to your point.
Because I think obviously I don't tell you, the people who are out there protesting against the government, most of them are rich Ashkenazi Jews, right? I mean, basically, whatever. So from that point of view, it's almost as though, the monopolists, the 1% are the enemy of this government. And you would think that this government, therefore, has an incentive to go break them up, to hit at them politically, and because, for political reasons, if not for economic reasons. But that's what I'm very surprised that it hasn't become a political strategy for this government, because I actually think it will be very effective. Because the fact is that 90% of Israelis are suffering from the cost of living. This is why, Israelis constantly complain. And the irony about Israel is that people think, Bibi he lives in Caesarea, so he represents that 1%. And it cannot be it cannot be more untrue, I don't have to tell you. The people who vote for Bibi are not the 1%. So from that point of view, this is why, I think the left, I think Bibi gives the left too much ammunition against him, okay, that he could have taken away very easily by going after that 1%. But again, going after that 1% is not about taxing them more heavily, but to take away their rent, which is a different story. Now, what I'm hoping, the rent. Because what I'm hopeful is this. I just hope, because, we can say right now, Trump just hit Israel with a 17% tariff. This could be an amazing opportunity for Bibi. Because the only way Bibi is going to be able to balance the trade between U.S. and Israel is by importing more from the U.S. If Bibi can use this opportunity to go after the importers, okay, so that actually people in Israel can enjoy cheaper imports and they import more, that would make Bibi a great politician. Okay, that's why in some sense the 17% tariff is a bad thing, but it could actually be a good thing if the government only knows how to use it, politically, and I think it could be a very powerful thing.
Avi, do you have any? I think our time is up, so we did it all, and I hope I think the interesting thing is about, one, the Israel economy is resilient, especially given the situation, okay? Also Russia. But the second thing is that there's a lot to fix, okay, still. The third, the cost of living is a political issue, first of all, and until people don't push the government enough, they are not going to do it. Politicians know one thing, what they need to do in order to get reelected. I'm sorry, they're very good at that, okay? And until they think that they're not going to get reelected because of the cost of living, they're not going to do too much. And I'm sorry, what I said right now has nothing to do with which politician. Okay? Each one have a different agenda. Thank you very much. Anybody who wants later on catch any of us before and after food, please. Thank you.